You're listening to Spellbound. Welcome to episode 33 of Spellbound. I'm Julian Smith. Today's a special episode because we're talking about happiness. I guess it's kind of important, happiness. What is happiness? Why does it look different culture to culture? What are the happiest nations on the planet? What is happiness on a biological level? These are all things we're talking about today. I will be joined by Andrew Rader, the fax machine, FACTS, as we call him here on this show. He's got a PhD from MIT. He's the smartest person in Canada, but now he lives in LA. Let's see how he holds up. He's doing pretty good. I know a little bit too, but I don't have a PhD from MIT. Regardless, we're talking about happiness. You don't have to have a PhD from MIT to know what that is, although it does help. If you are enjoying this podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or CastBox. Another great way to support us is to leave a review or rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or CastBox. That helps tremendously in getting in the ranking systems, and we care about 25% about that here in this podcast, so it's not that important, but it does help. Every little bit helps. Spellbound is now a CastBox original. You can still listen to it anywhere else you typically listen to podcasts, but check out CastBox today and see what's making it the fastest growing and highest rated podcast app for both iOS and Android. We're here.
We're not doing an intro? I thought we were doing an intro.
He's staring at me. This is a strange episode because this is the first episode we're recording outside because it's an episode on happiness. I'm here with Andrew Rader, the fax machine.
I'm back.
He's back. And we're talking about happiness. We were talking, Andrew and I were actually, this is one of our infamous conversations that started over beer, I believe. We were talking about what is happiness, and I remember we were talking about how beer is kind of happiness.
Literally, he said, yeah.
And so now whenever we are going to go get beer, we actually say, hey, you want to go get some happiness?
Get some happiness.
I'm actually,
which is funny because
I'm actually joking when I say
alcohol is
that.
a downer,
yeah.
right?
It's not
kinda
true.
supposed to depress you, although it does kind of make you happy. I don't know how it makes
It's
you
not
happy
true.
if it's a downer.
That's what led us to have this conversation, was like, what is happiness? Because, you know, there's like lots of different ways people achieve it, but like, what are the happiest places on the planet? Why are they happy? What constitutes happy?
Happiness is a very fuzzy concept. I think everyone knows what it is, but no one can really define it. Like, try to give a definition for happiness.
Well, I think happiness is subjective, first of all. I think people explain it different ways. But not that the feeling is subjective, but that the way people go about getting it is subjective. And this is true.
Well, that's true, but I think it's one of those things too, you know, and when you see it, you know, when someone's happy, you know, when they're not happy, but it's still hard to put your finger on exactly what it is. Obviously, pleasant feelings would be happy. Sort of euphoria is an extreme form of happiness, I guess, but it's maybe also things that are different from that, maybe a little deeper than that. Obviously, you can be happy in the moment, and that doesn't mean the same thing as being happy with your life. Happiness from moment to moment goes up and down, but there's sort of a general happiness or contentment with your life that is different. And I think that's more what we're talking about when we talk about happiness. At a very basic level, there's only 4 things that make you happy. They're neurotransmitters. So at some level, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins are the only things that actually make you happy. That is the definition from a scientific perspective, I guess, of happiness. At least from a chemical perspective, that is happiness. It's when your brain says, oh, it's firing these chemicals, and it triggers the right neurons that are associated in your brain with happiness, which is very interesting, right? Because if you have neurons in your brain, you also have neurons in your brain that are associated with negative feelings, right? And so
totally.
It's like, how am I interpreting these neurons as positive and these neurons as negative, right?
This is like the basis of nutrition, you could say. I went and saw a nutritionist to balance out my neurotransmitters, and she put me on specific vitamin supplements that would balance my I was like, I'm not feeling right. Like, I just feel off. I'm like, don't want to eat certain things anymore. I'm like getting allergies that I've never had. And it was all in my head, basically. You know?
Well, everything's all in your head. I mean literally vitamins, everything is for humans.
It was nutritional for sure, but like the end result was getting my brain straightened out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's true.
But obviously in life, when we talk about happiness, generally we're talking about more than just those neurotransmitters. I guess maybe in some sense you want a consistent firing of those neurotransmitters in a positive way.
Not that that's all it is.
To some extent it is, but obviously you could take drugs all the time and you'd get used to them and you wouldn't be happy as much if you took the drugs.
Well, that depletes you when you take drugs.
Right, exactly.
It depletes. So, it's not creating something. It's depleting something that's already there, and then you have to restore it.
We talked about this on another episode. I can't remember which one, but if you basically could take drugs all the time and constantly instill this feeling of happiness, would that be the same as really being happy? Oh, this is Brave New World.
This is Brave New World.
Soma,
this is Soma and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. What episode was that? 14 or something like that?
So, I mean, obviously it's a state of well-being that encompasses living a good life.
I saw this World Happiness Report. They do this annual report where they research the happiest countries globally. They actually narrowed it down to 6 factors. They said it was strong economic growth, healthy life expectancy, quality social relationships, generosity, trust, and a freedom to live the life that's like feels meaningful and fulfilling to themselves, like in their own way. Like they had all those things combined, was the consistent criteria of all the most happy societies.
Does that include goal seeking? Was that one of them to sort of seek
That
a
kind,
goal?
I guess I could fall into the last one. They actually call it freedom to live the life that's right for you.
Because I think one of the things that's almost in a separate category from happiness is fulfillment. And I don't even think that's a branch of happiness. I think that's a totally separate thing, or pursuing a goal. So like if you're writing a book or you're working on an essay or having kids even, or you're looking after your parents who are sick or something like that, I don't know that you necessarily get happiness from that, but you get a sense of fulfillment. And maybe it's even painful. Like, right, you can have experiences that are really painful. You can go through depression or maybe an illness or something like that, and you come out the other side and you weren't happy, but maybe you learned something and your life is more fulfilled. I think this is a totally separate concept.
Yeah, but maybe you're happy as a result.
Well, I don't
I think
know.
you're not happy if you're stagnant and you have to grow.
Well, that's true, but I think that's a totally separate dimension from happiness. This sense of fulfillment or achieving goals, sense of accomplishment. So like I always kind of make fun of happiness, saying I don't want to be happy. Happiness is stupid, right? I could just go and have fun every day, but I wouldn't accomplish anything. Like I guess it's the reason I don't just sit around and watch television. I guess that would sort of make me happy to some extent, but happy in the moment, and then it wouldn't be fulfilling as a life. Like I have things I want to get done, you know? And so it's pursuing goals and achieving things. It's not happiness. In fact, I don't think I'm necessarily all that happy, but I have a strong sense of fulfillment from like pursuing goals and achieving them. And I think that's a totally different dimension that people often forget about.
Well, yeah, I think what you're saying is that that's not enough, but that can be an aspect of it.
Is that not enough? I think that's a totally separate dimension that maybe it's not. I mean, obviously,
I'm just saying
would be
it's like
happy and fulfilled.
I think being fulfilled is an aspect of happiness.
Yeah, I'm not sure it is, because I think a lot of the things that make you fulfilled don't make you happy. In fact, I think they make you unhappy.
That's a good argument. That's a good argument. Yeah.
Good. So I don't see how
you're talking about discipline.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good argument. But
Right.
this is where discipline comes into play. It doesn't mean that you can't have fulfillment and it be rewarding and make you happy. You have to have balance in all things.
Nietzsche.
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 Isn't that how he would want you to say it?
Nietzsche, probably, yeah. He says, man does not strive for happiness, only the Englishman does. He's kind of making fun of the English people and British people.
Oh, Nietzsche.
Basically, he thought that the point of life was not to be happy, but to fulfill goals or aim of one existence. The will, he always says. And just pursuing happiness makes you contemptible. So he yearned for a culture that would have higher, more difficult goals than mere happiness. He wants us to consider the value of what is difficult, what can only be earned through struggle, difficulty, pain.
He's talking about evolution.
And thus come to see an affirmative value of suffering.
Yeah, he's talking about leaning into your challenges and the suffering. And
yeah, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, sort of, I guess is his point. Life is about learning things, and you learn through adversity, right? You learn through things that go wrong. You got to have a lot of failure in life to learn things. You got to have a lot of pain and suffering and struggle. For him, life was about struggle. It wasn't about happiness. Happiness is kind of...
Nietzsche did go crazy, though.
Yeah, I'm not saying this is necessarily the way we should live. It's not a model for life. He
was right about a lot of things, but the guy went nuts.
Yeah, it's not a model for life.
I love Nietzsche.
But you can see what he's getting at. I think that he's saying that there's something beyond happiness that's a whole different dimension that's not, it's not smiling, it's not laughing, but it's kind of like, looking back on your life. Because I kind of think like, when I look back on my life, assuming that happens and I don't just like die suddenly in a plane crash or something like that, well, I look back on my life and say, yes, I accomplished my goals. I guess it's like a bucket list, but it's not like fun things.
Yeah. You could say
like surfing.
You could say Nietzsche didn't
Well, I did do surfing last week. So, but
You went surfing last week?
Yeah.
I went surfing last week.
First time? Oh, really?
First time for you too?
No, first time.
Oh, I sucked so bad.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
It's pretty hard to stand up.
I was pretty unhappy, you could say. I was unfulfilled.
Skydiving, I've done that. What are the other? I've never done bungee jumping.
This is a tangent.
Bucket list.
You could say Nietzsche's only problem is he didn't have discipline for his suffering.
Yeah, I suppose.
He wasn't disciplined in his suffering. He like stayed in suffering mode. He never enjoyed anything.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm reading a couple of his books, and he's a brilliant writer. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He's genius. But some of the stuff he says, it's like this guy clearly like lost it. He like just pushed himself way too hard.
Yeah, but that's how you accomplish things, pushing yourself.
Yeah,
right?
but there's like a peak, and so it's like you got to know when to relax. You only have so much energy.
Relaxation's not something usually associated with Nietzsche.
The guy did not know how to chill out.
Aristotle, though, the Greeks did not have a concept of happiness as an emotional state. Happiness was an activity, so something you pursue, but you couldn't be. So you couldn't really be happy. And their word was eudaimonia, which is like use good, like eutrophication, euphoria, you good, and demon, which means spirit, basically. So eudaimonia.
They called happiness a demon?
Yeah, their word for happiness essentially translates as good demon or good spirit, really. I mean, demon just means spirit, right? So it's not associated with bad, but it's the same as our word, like it translates identical to our word
this
for
is Aristotle.
good demon. Aristotle, eudaimonia. So this is the Greek word, but Aristotle wrote about it, and he thought that happiness wasn't really something that could be achieved. At least from what we know, happiness is not a thing that can be achieved. It's a pursuit of something. And this is actually, people suspect that the definition of happiness has changed over time. So when Jefferson said, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, like in the American Declaration of Independence, they kind of meant it as like pursuit, literally like people are chasing happiness, but they might not ever be happy. So it's not like a thing you can be. It's not like we think of happiness as a state. So I'm happy or I'm unhappy, but they kind of thought of it like, are you pursuing happiness? Are you following your goals? Therefore you are happy.
Right.
Even if, you're not actually really what we would call happy. You're happy because you're pursuing your dreams, you're following your goals, and you're happy. And that's, I think, what the Greeks thought about it too. It's like this pursuit. So it's kind of like doing stuff. You can't be happy if you're not doing stuff. It's not just brain chemicals, I guess. Although at some level, obviously, it is brain chemicals, but it's kind of like more complex than just happy, than just like smiling and laughing.
You're talking about Aristotle. He was highly influential in Roman Catholicism theology.
What's the Roman Catholic take on happiness? They're not usually known for their happiness.
Aristotle and Plato were like really influential in Western Christianity is what I'm trying to get at.
Which is ironic because they're the pagans. It's like, so it's more than just, a positive mood. It's a state of well-being that encompasses living the good life. So it's a way of living that's like a fulfilled, deeply satisfying way of living. That's what I think Aristotle saw.
It's the American dream.
It is, but I think like from a Roman Catholic perspective, maybe it's like praying, twice a day or whatever it is, and kind of following the rules and having a connection with God and community and things like that. It's maybe something like that. That's maybe their view of happiness is like the pursuit of
the intangible.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not really sure. I'm not Roman Catholic, but
religion is so ingrained in our culture here that even if you're not religious, you still believe in a inherent sense of good and evil. You still size things up in terms of good or bad.
Well, I don't know if that's true. I actually think everything is a scale of gray. Absolutely everything in life is a scale of gray, I think.
That's what I think too, but I think a lot of people don't see it that way. A lot of people are constantly say like, oh, why shouldn't somebody kill someone? Why shouldn't somebody rape someone? Why is that bad?
Because they're thinking beings with feelings. How would, you could put yourself in their position. How would you want to be that person? We should treat each other with respect because we're all part of a society that has to live together.
Yeah.
And we think there's fundamental value to human life, to really all life. But again, I think that is even a spectrum of all life, right? Like, a fly has some value, I guess, but it's pretty darn low.
What I'm saying is, if this whole place is just a test, if this place doesn't matter,
right,
then we're not incentivized to take care of it.
I think that's true. So you're saying that the idea of a paradise elsewhere removes incentives for treating this life as the real life.
This is why half the population still denies global warming, even though we're getting record temperatures in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago.
Bring on the apocalypse.
122 degrees Fahrenheit in Southern California.
It is true that some Christians want to bring on the apocalypse actively. For example, the Book of Revelations, the Final Judgment, things like that. Throughout history, that has been a thing that has happened for sure. Yeah.
On the other hand, you have the Bhutanese. They are one of the happiest nations on earth. Finland's #1. I don't have to tell you. You're the facts machine. Why don't you tell me what the happiest countries in the world
Well,
are?
Scandinavia, Iceland.
You're out of order.
Oh, well.
I'll tell you. I got the facts this time. It's #1 in order starting from #1. Finland.
Uh-huh.
#2, Norway.
Okay.
#3, Denmark.
Yeah.
Iceland, Switzerland.
Those are all the same country.
This is official.
They wanted to be the same country at one point.
Canada is #7, man.
Yeah, Canada's great.
Congrats.
They're always happy, yeah. The thing is, Bhutan is happier than it should be, considering its wealth, income, and things like that. Right? There's a number of factors that lead to happiness, and some buck the trend a little bit. Like, wealth does lead to happiness, but only up to a point. Lack of corruption leads to happiness.
Bhutan also has none of the other like economical stability things that were required in the World Happiness Report.
Right. So Bhutan is like an outlier in that it's relatively happy considering
it has no amenities, no support.
Right. Exactly.
They're as bad as happy as
I
they
think
can
they
be.
just got internet like 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Or something. Yeah. The king said,
"How happy can you be?"
It's fine. Yeah. How happy can you be with the internet? Yeah. Well, you don't see cat pictures, right?
Yeah.
Don't the cat pictures make you happy?
Yeah, that's
the
happiness.
Memes? You don't get memes.
But the Bhutanese, when you ask a Bhutanese person what they, how they cope with, how they get happiness from life, they actually contemplate death for 5 minutes a day, sometimes twice a day for 5 minutes.
You would think that would make you unhappy.
Yeah, but they lean into it. For them, it's about realizing, and the reason they do it is it's about realizing that you're going to die one day and you're never going to accomplish all the things you want to accomplish. And you're never going to get to spend as much time watching your kids grow up as you want. And you've got to be okay with what you have now and living in the moment. And so
live
for
every
them,
day like it's your last.
Yeah, and so for them, contemplating death isn't about like, oh, it's not like a depressing thing. It's just like, it's like a very humbling, and when you think about, and I didn't know this until today, but this is actually, I think about death a decent amount. And, and I thought I was kind of weird that I thought about thinking about death until I heard this. And I was like, oh, it actually makes sense. Like when you think about death and you realize that, like that has changed my perspective. So I actually, when I heard that, I lit up.
Yeah, thinking about death makes you think about life, living it to its fullest, I guess. Yeah, so from that perspective, it kind of makes sense. Also, isn't Bhutan mostly Buddhist?
That's a good question.
So
Let's see.
this is kind of interesting because Buddhists, don't they kind of not really believe in happiness? This is maybe my misconception, but basically, like Buddha's teaching is
it is Buddhist.
So maybe it's like the peace, internal peace of happiness. So it's a misconception that they don't believe in happiness, but they think happiness is not achieved through the pursuit of material things.
This is another inconsistency with Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, because Western philosophy is based on like good and bad, right? Basically, everything's good or good. There's black and white. And
what about yin and yang? Isn't that good and bad?
That's the opposite. It's not compatible with yin and yang, because yin and yang is about balance, and it's not compatible with the narrative of the West.
Isn't that like why they added Satan? Satan's only in like the last chapter of the Bible or something like that, but just to balance it out. It's like almost a philosophy thing of balancing out the good and bad.
Well, there's speculation that he's the reptile in the Eden story, but it's, that's all subjective.
Oh, okay, yeah. But he was good, right? Lucifer, he was an angel and then became bad.
Right.
Okay. But I thought it was just like a balance thing too, because like, how can we tell you about all this good stuff? And yeah, there's no bad stuff. Okay. I guess there was the serpent, but the serpent kind of wasn't in the story after the Garden of Eden. So
a common misconception is that the serpent was a snake. The original word indicated a bipedal reptilian person.
Yeah, like a lizard. Yeah, it's true that we get confused in those stories between lizards and dragons.
Christian theology has to explain this away by saying that, from that moment, because there's a verse that says you will slither on the ground for the rest of your days or something. And so they say, oh, well, that's the moment God like took Lucifer's legs away.
So why does everything have dragons? You know how like China has dragons, Europe had dragons, they had the knights fighting the dragons.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is that all of our ancient texts have reptilian, bipedal creatures and dragons and things like that.
Yeah,
and
even in Mesoamerica, I think the Aztecs and stuff, they had lizards
across many religions and cultures,
which is really strange because they didn't really talk to each other, right? So
yeah, and there's also, this is also a tangent and not about happiness, but fun fact about this theory that we're on, since we're on it. Octopuses are our cousins from our bacterial youth. There was a split, so octopuses had consciousness first, before us. in the ocean. And so there's we don't even know how smart octopuses are. They're like potentially smarter than us. And so a lot of people think
I don't think they're smarter than us, but they're pretty smart.
we don't know how smart they are actually because their cognition is decentralized.
Okay, but they don't necessarily do a lot with their intelligence if they're really smart. Maybe they're like really great philosophers,
right,
but they
exactly.
kind of keep it to themselves.
That's not what I'm saying, though. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if fish still exist, then octopus would still exist, but they would have maybe beat us to land.
I'm sorry, what?
They could have maybe beat us to land.
No, I don't understand.
If they evolved, maybe they could have gotten to land before amphibians.
Well, sure they could, but I think so. Octopus still exist as in their ancient form because they were successful, because they're still successful in that form. So things don't change if there's no pressure to change. Fish, fish have been around. Coelacanths are really old fish for like 300 million years. They haven't changed at all because they work. Things don't change if they work. Dragonflies are basically the same as they were like 400 million years ago. Same thing with turtles. Pretty much the same as they've always been because it works. So
right,
there's
but octopuses still could exist
change.
because fish still exist. But that's not to say that something couldn't have evolved from an octopus that could have beat us to land.
Oh, sure, it absolutely could. In fact, things did. Snails, for example, are
there you go.
Cousins of the, but they're a little more dim-witted than the octopus.
This is actually a common mistake that a lot of Christians make about when they're arguing evolution, because they say like, oh, well, if we evolved from apes, then why do we still have apes? But it's actually not a good argument because, like you just said, things only adapt to the extent that they have to. But if you're constantly pushing forward, it could create a new species and we wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah. That's also why we're afraid of snakes, and probably why all cultures have dragons, because snakes were a big enemy of primates, monkeys, chimps, things like that. They eat monkeys in the wild, so we inherited from our ancestors a fear of snakes.
Interesting.
That's probably why we all have dragons. It's weird. Dragons are especially weird because dragons aren't even a real thing
anymore.
Except, yeah. Well, they used to think that like when they dug up dinosaur bones, they thought they were like dragons, right?
Oh, did we?
Yeah. We thought they were like dragons from the stories. Like they were dragons back in the stories. So where are the dragons? Oh, there's giant bones. Oh, these are the dragons.
All right, we're talking about happiness, people.
Okay, let's get back to happiness.
We're actually going to put a pin right here to take a sponsored break, but we're still talking about happiness because we make a great effort on this podcast to represent reputable brands. I get to try most of the products, fortunately, that we endorse here. I've been in this business a long time, and you don't always get that chance, but we strive very hard to test all the products we endorse here. And one of the most recurring brands to have come back and sponsor this podcast is RX Bar. I love this product. We all eat things on the go. It's part of life now. We're running around doing different things. You got to throw something in your bag for later in case you don't know if you're going to get time for lunch or you're going to be driving for 3 hours if you're like me and you live in LA. RX Bar is an amazing little snack you can throw in your bag and just know it's there. RX Bars are healthy protein bars that are loaded with whole foods. It's basically like eating 3 egg whites, 2 dates, 6 almonds with absolutely no BS. Because let's be honest, there's no such thing as palatable BS, no matter how politically correct you are. RX Bars are gluten-free, soy-free, dairy-free, no added sugar, no artificial colors, no artificial flavors, preservatives, or fillers. Egg whites are a great source of protein, easy for your body to absorb. Dates make a great binding agent. They hold the whole bar together. It's not going to crumble apart on your lap in the car. And the nuts add some texture. I like that. And the little flavors they add in. Each bar has a little different flavor. My favorite one personally is the chocolate coconut and the dark chocolate sea salt. But they've got this product figured out. It's quite impressive. Everybody has their own favorite flavors, obviously, but I usually have at least a few of my go-tos on me at any given time, just in case I get in a bind. And whether you prefer sweet, savory, chocolatey, or fruity, there's definitely an RX bar for you. They're giving our listeners a special deal today. If you're listening, they're going to give you 25% off your first order. Time to stock up. To redeem this deal, head on over to rxbar.com/spellbound and enter the coupon code spellbound at checkout. That's rxbar.com/spellbound, coupon code spellbound at checkout.
So
thinking about
we're talking about Okay, I don't want to think about that. We're talking about neurotransmitters, and there's a feedback loop in your brain. I'd like to stay at the party as long as possible.
You don't want to contemplate death?
I don't mind contemplating it.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty profound. I had a thought, maybe the first time I ever really thought about it was maybe 10, 15 years ago, and I just realized, hey, like, I'm not going to be here forever. That's a weird thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One day,
I don't know if everyone has this, but there was like one day in my life that I suddenly confronted it and thought, that's interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever had that moment. Maybe I did, and I don't remember.
And just try to think about what that's like. Try to imagine the world without you. It's really tough because you see the world through your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
We should have an episode about death, but that is not this episode.
That is not this episode.
Not today. That's what you say to death. Not today. That's Arya. That's Game of Thrones.
That's right. Not today.
Not today. So there's a feedback loop in your brain with neurotransmitters. So when you're happy, you smile and you laugh, right? But smiling actually also makes you happy. So it's not just that, that, you know, if you're happy, you smile. It's you can make yourself happy by smiling.
You can trick you. You can actually release dopamine by laughing.
Exactly. And I do this sometimes at work. not laugh out loud. Definitely, I don't laugh like that. First of all, I don't laugh like that. If you want to be happier, you can smile. And I kind of do this when I'm stressed. I'm like going around smiling like the Joker.
So now I know how to know when you're stressed.
Exactly.
So next time you smile at me, it'll be like, it's going to be okay, pal.
I'm probably stressed. Yeah, exactly. Because it's a way to like force your brain, get happy, stupid. It's like, that, was Troy McClure? This is what I do before public speaking, too. Get confident, stupid. That's what I always say to myself. Which is from The Simpsons.
That's good.
I'm giving everyone my secrets.
Get confident, you jackass.
There's two bases of happiness. Two theories about what makes us happy and what makes us unhappy. Okay, so one is you have an equilibrium level of happiness. And if good things happen to you, you become happier. Bad things happen, you are unhappier, but you always return to this equilibrium state of happiness. So your happiness is predetermined, and you really, over time, cannot make yourself happier or unhappy. You're just a happy person naturally by your genes, or unhappy. That's the one. So, and they've done studies on this. If they follow people who like won the lottery, and a year later, they're basically no happier than they would have been. They have more money. So as soon as they win the lottery, obviously they're happy, but it always returns to normal. So a year after winning the lottery, they're just as happy or miserable as they were before.
Yeah, well, money doesn't mean anything.
Well, that's true. But even good things and bad things that happen to you that you would say do mean something to you actually have no long-term effect on your happiness. There's no way to change your long-term happiness.
Yeah, I guess I agree with that.
That's one theory about it. The other theory is social comparisons. So if you're doing better than the people around you, you're going to be happier.
Yeah, so this explains why people get excited when they hear that, something bad happens to somebody else. They get they want to gossip. They want to oh, did you hear about so-and-so?
There's a Russian story about this. There's two farmers, Ivan and Boris, and they're the same in every way. Ivan and Boris, they're pretty poor farmers, just making it, just scraping by, just harvesting enough turnips every year to eat. And the only difference is Boris has a goat. Ivan comes across a genie who grants a wish. He could ask for money, he could ask for food, he could ask to be taken out of the situation, become a rich man, he could ask for gorgeous wife, whatever it is. But the only thing that Ivan wants is, he says, I wish Boris' goat would die.
That's messed up.
So it's just playing on the idea that you are happier if everyone around you does worse, basically, because you're just comparing yourself to other people. So if people do poorly, you become happy. If other people do well, you become unhappy with your situation. So it's just a social comparison. I guess that's a bit similar to the equilibrium in a sense, because
this is the keeping up with the Joneses.
Keeping up with the Joneses, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's the other theory of happiness. Basically,
but that's a false sense of happiness.
Well, it's irrational, but I think it's probably true.
Is it like an evolutionary thing, maybe? Maybe we're evolutionarily predisposed to feel that way.
Well, it's because humans have weird psychological things where we can't judge absolutes. We can only judge comparisons. So we look and judge ourselves relative to others because that's our frame of reference, right? It's hard to judge yourself in absolute terms, right?
Yeah.
I think that's why it comes about. But it's totally irrational. And it's why countries like the United States is the wealthiest nation ever that's ever existed, but it's relatively unhappy. It's not, it's sort of medium. It's definitely not the happiest. And it's probably largely because of inequality. So the United States is one of the wealthiest nations in the world, wealthiest nation that ever existed, probably is, in fact, but it has higher rates of inequality. So some people are super rich and some people are not that well off. And so it has a lot of opportunities for social comparison. So comparing yourself to the Joneses, basically, keeping up with the Joneses. So if you're looking around, you might have everything you need. You might have a car, you might have an air conditioner, you might have a phone, you might have everything you need. Stuff that, 200 years ago the president of the United States would have found magical, like like Abraham Lincoln, if he had an air conditioner and a cell phone.
Give me a break.
Exactly.
Like he might be Donald Trump.
Television or something like that. Like these were things you couldn't buy. Medicine.
You might actually know the guy was a racist.
The people, the poorest people today. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't problems, with wealth disparity and stuff like that, but the poorest people today in the United States can afford things that were just not possible to buy like hundreds of years ago,
Totally.
right? And but just this inequality means that people judge themselves against others. I guess even like the Instagram stuff, you see like people posting beautiful images and fun times on Instagram, and you think, oh my God, I'm so unhappy because they look what they're doing. Like, doesn't it? This is the stereotype with teens on Instagram, just seeing their friends posting images. And remember, they probably took 100 pictures and they're only posting the ones where they're smiling. They're happy, they turned out and they're looking really hot. So they pick the pictures that show the best snapshots of their life. And that has the potential to make other people unhappy because they're seeing, the Jones is doing really well.
Yeah, and it's messed up because the people who are doing the best on Instagram are the people who they just like flaunt it even more. It's like it's all about Instagram's so like a lifestyle contest. Yeah.
Right, so we're constantly chasing happiness.
Yeah,
it's exactly what.
But
Buddha
you'll never
was
be
warning,
as big as Justin Bieber, so it
yeah,
doesn't matter.
I'm not sure we want to be Justin Bieber.
I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying. I'm just saying that it's an endless.
Right.
It's not going to bring you happiness.
Oh yeah, well that's the other thing. Because of the equilibrium of happiness, no one really is. I mean, everyone's just as happy as they were going to be anyway. Basically, if you have what you need to live a fulfilled life, then you should be happy regardless of what other people have, right? It doesn't matter what they have. I mean, it should be based on what you have, not what other people have.
This is what's so great about meditating. And I also find like yoga to be kind of, I do yoga most days. It's like a form of meditation, just like being just aware of like what you have and thankful. And
yeah, exactly.
Just thinking about your body, just taking care of your body. I do a little stretch in the mornings, get my muscles stretched out for the day. So I'm like thinking about my body and what it needs. And then I think about what I have and what I have to do. And that just puts me in a really good, productive frame of mind.
As we improve in society, we become wealthier. We, learn to cure diseases. I think by almost every measure, the world is improving, but people aren't getting happier because we're all just at this equilibrium that we're never going to change from because it's just like genetically based, this happiness. The other thing that's interesting is people are really bad at judging other people's happiness. In fact, we tend to think that other people are less happy than they are. I think that now there's a lot of division in society and we kind of have this view that everyone's unhappy and there's huge epidemics of unhappiness. And to some extent there are. Suicides, for example, are higher with the opioid epidemic and things like that. But there have been times in American history where it was actually much worse. Suicide rates were higher than they are now. Unhappiness, quote, whatever that is, was worse than it is now. And people have always been really bad at judging other people's happiness. And people have always thought that people are kind of miserable, actually. So Walden's a story by Henry David Thoreau. He wanted to escape society as the first, like, I'm going to go out in the woods, get a cabin and escape from technology in the modern world, basically, even though it wasn't all that modern back then.
Hilarious.
But he has a quote. I think it starts with the line, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." So he thought that everyone's basically unhappy.
Well, Western society probably is like, it's probably one of the most unhappy, right?
Is it though? I think we have this sense that it is, but I don't really think
Let's see where America is.
I think America's it's sort of middling, but higher than average.
Oh, it is. It's actually number 18.
Right, 18. So that's not terrible, right? We were talking about the factors that make people happy, and the U.S. actually has a lot of them. GDP per capita is really high. Social support is sort of medium, I guess, some parts better than others. Life expectancy in America is pretty high. It's not the highest, but it's pretty high. Freedom to make life choices, that's pretty high. Generosity and corruption levels, medium, I'd say. Corruption levels increasing, but America has a lot of the factors that make people happy, not all of them, and so it's not the happiest place. But I think we have the sense that people are unhappy. But people have always thought people were unhappy, like the Beatles song Eleanor Rigby. In fact, it was funny because just before this conversation, you mentioned a Beatles song that you thought made them think that everyone was happy. right? What was that?
Oh yeah, I was saying how the Beatles were such a, it was like an act out of post World War II abundance, because it was like all you need is love. It's like, well, they clearly like had nothing to worry about.
Yeah, well, that's true. So I mean, one of the happiest generations, I think, was the post World War II generation. After this struggle, right? But interestingly, like during the war, and suicide rates went down because they had a purpose in life. They like had a sense of mission. We have to defeat the Nazis. We have to defeat Hitler, right? Like it's like this grand purpose that we're all united in. And people had the sense that that was the time America was the great. I think that's like Make America Great Again. Like
Yeah,
everyone looks at the
I
1950s.
agree with that. Yeah, you're right.
But that's actually not the happiest time in America. And
we're
if
also
you look
not
at the
gonna be able to
actual
do that
data,
again.
people that was a time of fairly extreme poverty. Obviously, major social division, huge racism, Jim Crow, things like that. Like it was a terrible time in America, right? The 1950s, actually. But we look upon it like Leave It to Beaver or something like that. Like it was so great, and we had such great values. But I don't think that's really true.
Well, life got really easy then, because that was also the time that like home appliances started coming out to like give people more leisure time.
Right.
You could have like a dishwasher.
Yeah,
you know?
doing the wash,
You
like
could
the
have-
laundry used to be all like one whole day.
You were selling
basically.
people leisure.
Wash day, they
you were
used to call
giving,
it. Yeah.
you were selling them happiness supposedly, but then I think people got disillusioned.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. On people misjudging happiness of others or seeing happiness in unhappiness in others, Eleanor Rigby. That is like the definition of an unhappy song. But you were saying that's related to their drugs.
Yeah, it was the Revolver. It was Revolver. It was their that was their big psychedelic experimentation record. That was their first like it was their darkest record. There was a lot of people started hating the Beatles at that time.
I think that's my favorite one.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites too.
All the early Beatles like Twist and Shout. It's kind of lame.
For me, it's a tie. For me, it's a tie between Revolver and the White Album.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. I think you're right there. Yeah. Deeper. Least happy places in the world: Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria. Right now, kind of makes sense because they all have wars. So yeah,
that's sad.
Wars do make you unhappy, obviously. But some things make you happy disproportionately to GDP. So wealth does actually make you happier up to a point. So,
but not past 70,000.
Money can buy you love. Well, not love, maybe, but happiness up to a point.
Yeah, it's 70,000 in America.
Yeah,
on
that's
average.
right. So basically, up to roughly speaking, sort of standard mean GDP or slightly above does increase happiness. But beyond that, you just become disillusioned with it, I guess. But Latin America, for example, has relatively low incomes per capita, but actually more happiness than they should for that GDP because of the social connections, because there tends to be a lot of family unity and family support and things like that. So Latin America tends to be happier than its GDP would indicate. Eastern Europe tends to be less happy than its GDP would indicate because they tend to have a lot of corruption. We're talking about Moldova, I think is one of the least happy countries in the world that doesn't have an active war right now. Just because a lot of corruption in the country. It's hard. Corruption, I think this is the other thing. Corruption creates a sense of an unequal playing field. So you're being treated differently, right? You're being treated differently than someone else because they've paid someone money, or they have family connections and nepotism, something like that. So they have some like ties to the state, the leader, and so they get ahead because of that, but not because of their merit. So I think that ties into our inane sense of equality and fairness from being hunter-gatherers. We want to think that everyone like should be rewarded for the share of the hunting and the gathering they did and the contributions they made, not like bribing the leader. Like if they just scratch the leader's back, then they get a reward.
Right.
Also, it's hard these days because we, thought all these, getting ahead and, pursuing our goals and trying to have fulfilling careers and all this and having kids would make us happier, but it creates this really difficult juggling act where you're trying to balance everything and you never feel like you have any time. And I think that might erode happiness too, because you're trying to juggle all these things and it's hard to kind of manage all that, especially in the United States, like really low vacation times, really low paternity, maternity leave. We work really hard, like in Scandinavia and Europe in general, actually. They get, 6 weeks of vacation a year, I think, something like that.
Right.
They get
in France, you get like a nanny for like 6 months or
18
something.
months, I think, of maternity leave. And I think a year of paternity leave, something like that. Depends on the country, but, really generous compared to here. And I guess that does lead to happiness, right? I think a lot more that creates happiness. But I mean,
Well, I think happiness is balance at the end of the day. It's having its balance, and it's being perfectly balanced. If the happiest people are probably the most perfectly balanced, and I think you can explain it by the criteria on that list of all the economical things that can help support people in finding happiness individually. But it's also, what were you about to say?
I think you're right, actually.
Yeah.
That's right. The funny thing is, I think you're right, but I also kind of believe that happiness is genetic and you can't really change it. So I don't know what that means, because
Well,
I kind of believe
different...
two different things. One is that you can change happiness based on your circumstances, but the other is you're kind of a product of your genes in terms of how happy you're going to be, and you can only make minor deviations about that, right?
This goes back to the neurotransmitter thing we were
talking about. So it's
kind
of like difficult. This is why happiness is such a amorphous quantity. It's like elusive. It's hard to put your finger on, because it's I'm not exactly sure what it is. It's why I've always kind of shunned happiness, I guess, because like I don't know how to be happy, but I do know how to accomplish things. So I've always looked at kind of fulfillment and accomplishment as like more valuable than happiness, because it's something I know I can do. Whereas happiness, like, what does that mean? I guess like I'm pretty happy now. It's nice outside.
What about when we hang out?
Yeah.
That makes me
social
happy.
Connection. Yeah, social connection.
Well, we're not always working.
No, we're not. But
I think you can find. I think things can make you happy.
But I wonder.
But you can't go find it.
But I try to think about like the purpose and everything, and I guess I enjoy hanging out with you because you have a different perspective from me, so I learn things.
That's why I like it too.
So it's kind of like growth. It's kind of.
I feel the same way.
But isn't that kind of also saying that's like a goal thing rather than a happiness thing? It's like goal oriented.
Well, for me, this is why I stand by the fulfillment thing being an aspect of happiness, because being friends with you makes me happy. You're one of the people I enjoy hanging out with you, and I enjoy hanging out with other people too. And you know, other people make me happy. I feel that when I'm with people that make me feel good, and like they're challenging me, and I'm learning, and we're learning together, and you're doing things together. I think that can be like a sense of fulfillment that actually can make you happy.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's actually one of the most proven ways to increase happiness is to focus on social connections, family.
I agree with that.
Spend more time with your kids.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That sort of thing. So I think that's right. Definitely. It's hard to, I find it hard to focus on those kinds of things because I have all these goals I want to accomplish. But I think you're right.
Well, it's hard to find that balance. I struggle with that too. I struggled with that for years, man. When I was doing that YouTube grind for like 10 years, I was like, I didn't take time for anything, and I made myself so unhappy. And I had everything I wanted other than my happiness. And that's what made me stop making YouTube videos. And everybody thought I was crazy. They were like, "Why are you stopping this?" Because I was making all this money, and like, I had everything I wanted, but I wasn't happy. And so I realized, I've lost my life.
That's kind of maybe balance and change,
that's
right?
Balance,
like finding something new and
that's
growth
balance.
And all these things, kind of the meaning of life.
Yeah, and I feel I'm in a place of life where I just feel so balanced right now, and I'm just every day I just feel so happy. It's like the happiest I've ever been. I just feel, it's great. Every day is great. Don't you feel that way?
I'm too busy to be happy. I've got goals, man.
I have goals too, man. I'm working my ass off.
Yeah.
I
know what you're saying, though. Yeah.
I worked all weekend, and I work every night.
Yeah.
I wake up at 6 a.m. and I do yoga, and I don't stop till midnight. But
do you meditate?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Dan Harris inspiration, or did you do that before?
No, I've done it on and off. It's actually funny. I used to do it daily. And then I heard this Alan Watts lecture that changed. You know Alan Watts?
No.
He's awesome. He kind of went crazy at the end of his time too, but he had some really awesome insights, and I was a big fan of his for a while. Still am. But he had this insight about, you can never really quite prepare yourself for the day. He's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to spend like an hour of yoga and an hour of meditation, and I'm going to make sure I take all my vitamins and supplements, and then in the afternoon I'm going to go for a run for an hour. And it's like, I'm going to spend half of my time just preparing myself to do whatever it is that I'm going to do. And then he also says that because Zen Buddhism's perspective on religion is that religion is the raft in the stormy sea. And when you reach land, you leave the raft behind. And he says that meditation for him is a form of religion. And so it can be helpful at times if you're really stressed, but that it's not like something you have to do every day. It's like an as needed kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I'm stressed, I try to meditate as well. Don't think I'm that good at it, but just try to purge my mind of thoughts.
Well, that's the whole struggle of it. People think they're not good at it, but it's actually it's a mental challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. I'm just trying to be in the moment. And
I find that I'm more focused as a result.
Yeah.
I'm much more efficient. I get things done a lot quicker, spin my wheels a lot less. But yeah, it is hard. I don't think anybody masters it.
We're going to turn it over to the listeners. We want to hear what you think about happiness. If you feel so inclined, go leave a comment on our brand new YouTube channel, youtube.com/spellbound show. That's a great way to involve yourself in the conversation. And we're starting from scratch. I haven't even plugged it on social media or my main YouTube channel yet. So that is definitely a place to go get started early if you're consider yourself a dedicated listener. Consider leaving a review or rating us on Apple Podcast or CastBox. Subscribe. All of these things help us tremendously. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Your endless support. You guys are awesome. I'm Julian Smith. This has been Spellbound. I'll see you next Monday. Stay happy.